The rain kept falling around her like a curtain of silver threads, and Mia could barely hear her own breath as the world blurred into shapes of light and sound, her mind spinning with the shock of seeing the little girl and the man beside her, their presence unreal yet grounding. She wanted to speak, but the words stayed trapped somewhere between her chest and her throat. As the little girl smiled and tugged at her sleeve, asking if she was okay, the man knelt beside her, his coat brushing the wet pavement, his hands strong yet gentle as he checked the wheels of her chair without saying a word. The rain soaked through his hair, but he did not seem to notice his focus entirely on her movements, on her trembling hands, on the way she tried. To hide her fear, she felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest as he looked up, his eyes steady, with something she could not name. He asked her if she was waiting for someone, and for a moment, she could not answer. The question felt like a blade cutting through the last bit of hope she had left. She wanted to lie to tell him that her date was still on his way, but the silence between them told the truth before she could speak. He gave a slow nod as if he understood something she had not yet said, and that made her heart ache even more. The little girl began to hum a soft tune, her boots tapping against the wet ground. Each note clear and bright in the night, the sound oddly comforting in its innocence. The man watched her for a moment, then turned his gaze back to Mia, his eyes reflecting the glow of the streetlight behind him. And for an instant, she thought she saw something familiar in that reflection. Something she had seen before in a dream. Maybe in another lifetime, the cafe door opened behind them, letting out a burst of laughter and warmth. Someone called out to the man using a name she could not hear over the rain. He seemed not to notice, or perhaps he did, but chose not to respond, his attention still on her. As if nothing else in the world existed, she wanted to ask who he was. But before she could, the little girl suddenly reached into her coat pocket and pulled out something small wrapped in red fabric. Mia watched as the girl unwrapped the fabric, revealing a tiny silver pendant shaped like a feather. The girl held it out and said that her daddy told her it brings courage to those who are alone. Mia stared at it, unsure what to say, her heart pounding harder with every second the man gave the faintest smile at his daughter's words, and for a moment the tension around them softened. Yet behind that softness was something deeper, something unspoken that made Mia's pulse quicken. The man finally spoke, his voice calm like distant thunder, telling her that no one deserved to be left in the rain, that everyone deserved at least one chance to be seen, truly seen. And though his tone was steady, his eyes flickered with a sadness that mirrored her own. She wondered what story hid behind his quiet composure. What pain lived behind those eyes that seemed to know too much? He stood and offered to help her back inside the cafe. But before she could answer, a dark car pulled up across the street, its headlights cutting through the rain. The driver lowered the window and called the man's name again, louder this time with an edge of authority. The man froze just for a second, and Mia caught the briefest flash of something on his wrist, a symbol she did not recognize, but one that stirred a memory she could not fully reach. The little girl tugged on his sleeve, asking if they could stay with Mia a little longer, but the man hesitated, his jaw tight, his gaze flicking between the car and the woman in the chair. He leaned closer to Mia and whispered something so softly that she could barely make out the words, something about not being afraid of storms, because storms reveal who stands beside you before stepping back into the rain. The car horn blared again, and the man looked torn, between two worlds, the one calling him from the shadows, and the one standing before him fragile, yet defiant. The little girl, still clutching her feather pendant, looked up at Mia with wide eyes and said she hoped they could meet again soon, her voice trembling with sincerity. Mia wanted to answer, but the words would not come. The man finally turned and led the girl toward the car, but halfway there he paused and looked back, his expression unreadable, his lips parting as if to speak. Then, closing again, the car door opened, waiting for him, and as he placed his hand on it, the streetlight above flickered, once casting a brief spark of light that made the pendant around the girl's neck shimmer like a tiny star, and in that flicker of light, Mia saw it clearly, the mark on his wrist glowing faintly for just a heartbeat, a symbol she knew she had seen before on a file she once read during her internship at the rehab center years ago, a symbol belonging to a foundation that helped Victims of tragedy founded by a man who had vanished after a mysterious accident that no one ever solved. The rain began to fall harder as the car engine roared to life and the tires splashed water over the curb. Mia sat frozen, her heart pounding, as she realized she was not just left behind by a careless date. She had been found by someone whose story might be more broken than hers. And though he disappeared into the night, his shadow lingered in the light of the street lamp, promising that their paths were far from over. Mia sat in silence long after the car vanished, her mind racing faster than the rain that drenched the streets around her. She could still see the shimmer of the pendant in her memory, still feel the weight of that moment when the man's eyes met hers, as if he knew something about her. Something even she had forgotten. The air smelled of iron and rain, and something electric that made her pulse echo in her ears. The cafe behind her had grown quiet, the once warm lights now dimmed as the last few customers left. She wheeled herself closer to the door, but then stopped. Something tugged at her senses, a whisper of instinct telling her to wait. She looked down at her lap and saw the red fabric, the one that had wrapped the pendant. She had not realized the girl had left it with her. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it again, staring at the delicate feather resting in her palm. It glowed faintly in the dark, as if it had a life of its own. She thought about calling someone a taxi, maybe a friend. But her phone was nearly dead and her body heavy with fatigue. Yet something inside her urged her to stay, to wait for what she could not say, perhaps for him to return. Perhaps for the meaning behind that symbol to reveal itself. She told herself it was foolish, but the feeling would not fade. And so she sat there listening to the rhythm of the rain until a faint sound broke through the quiet. It was a siren somewhere in the distance, growing louder, and closer, flashing red lights reflecting off the wet pavement as an ambulance sped past, followed by a black SUV that looked eerily like the one the man had entered moments ago. Her stomach clenched, a chill crawling up her spine. She wanted to believe it was a coincidence, but deep down she knew the world did not work on coincidences. Not for her, not tonight. The cafe door opened again, and the barista peeked out, surprised to see her still there. He offered her shelter inside, but as she turned to respond, her wheelchair bumped something at her feet, a small card half buried in rainwater. She picked it up carefully and wiped it clean, her breath catching as she read the embossed letters on the front. They bore the same symbol that had marked the man's wrist, the same one from that mysterious foundation. The name below it was clear and bold. Ethan Cole. Her mind reeled at the realization she had heard that name before years ago. During her rehabilitation, he had funded the facility. That gave her a second chance at walking again before the accident worsened her condition. But no one had seen him since, not after the explosion at his company's research lab that killed his wife and left his daughter orphaned. Or so everyone believed until tonight. Her heart pounded harder as pieces of a forgotten story began to fall into place. She remembered the newspaper headlines, the investigations, the whispers that Ethan had vanished to escape those who wanted him silenced. Because his company had uncovered something dangerous, something that could change lives, maybe even heal them. She had thought it was all rumor, but the look in his eyes earlier told her there was truth buried somewhere in that pain. Then her phone buzzed. Startling her, the screen flickered once before a message appeared from an unknown number, 3 words that made her blood run cold. Go home now. She stared at it, unsure what to do. The rain pounding harder as thunder rumbled in the distance. When she looked up, she saw headlights again, but this time it was not Ethan's car. A dark van stopped at the corner, its engine idling too long, its windows tinted so black she could not see who was inside. Fear pricked at her skin as she turned her wheelchair toward the cafe door. But before she could reach it, the van door slid open. A man stepped out, his face hidden under a hood. He called her name, not shouted, but spoken clearly, as if he already knew who she was. She froze, unable to move the pendant. In her hand